Thank you for having me. So we're talking today about happiness, and I am especially interested in the happiness of children and adolescents. I'm the executive director of DEEP, which is a nonprofit that teaches free after-school creative writing workshops. And in my 5 years there, we've worked with almost 2,000 students in middle schools across the city. And I've gotten to know them and care about them and read their writing and be tremendously impressed by what they're capable of. In fact, so impressed that one of them is actually here today. So can we give her a round of applause really quick? Students coming out here. Sierra. There's Sierra right there. And so I have a few things to say. I've become very interested in my students' happiness, and I've learned a few things about it. I have 3 things to say. The first is that students today, on the whole, are actually much unhappier than they ever have been. The second is that the reason they're unhappy is probably not what you think it is. And the third is that the solution is actually incredibly simple and actually makes adults' lives easier too. So first, kids are unhappier than they used to be. According to one study, the depression rates in teens today are 5 times higher than they were 100 years ago. According to the CDC, 16% of teens have seriously considered suicide, and 8% have actually attempted it. So to put that in perspective, in a normal graduating class at a high school of 300 kids, 24 of them have tried to kill themselves. This is incredibly serious, and I'm become very interested in this problem. And what I've discovered is that the reason kids are so unhappy today is not what you would think it is. So most of us associate unhappiness with problems, right? We associate happiness with good things happening. But in this case, that is exactly the wrong way to think about it. Kids today are not unhappy because they're facing too many problems or too many bullies or too much internet. They're unhappy because they are not having opportunities to face and overcome enough problems and enough challenges. It's because it works like a vaccine. So if a kid is young and they scrape their knees and get dumped by their boyfriend and fail a math test, what this does is actually inoculate them to future challenges that they're going to face as adults. They learn first how to overcome challenges, and second, that they can be overcome. And if they are not exposed to these things as a kid, then that makes them anxious, it makes them worried about failure, it makes them incapable of facing the real problems that we can't protect them from later on. And I just want to clarify, when I'm talking about problems and challenges, I'm talking about the good kind, not the bad kind. So the bad kind of bad experience is something that is traumatic, like abuse. That's never good, and that's never excusable. The good kind is the kind that is upsetting, that hurts their feelings, but that they can get over. So like getting dumped by a boyfriend or failing a math test. Our kids today, we're trying too hard to protect them from the good kind of bad experiences. There's science behind this too. According to Psychology Today, about 20% of infants are born a little bit high-strung. And some of these kids grow into high-strung kids who are anxious and unhappy, and some of them grow into kids who mellow out and become happy. The difference is, according to research, how their parents treat them as infants. So if the parents hover over them and try to protect them and are always worried about whether something will upset them, the kid grows into a very anxious child. But if the parents decide, you know what, let them bump their knees and let them get in a little bit of trouble, then the kid starts to realize that bad things aren't so bad, and they mellow out. There are 2 examples. I think we've all can think about helicopter parenting and examples of that, but this is something that the school system is also involved in protecting kids too much to the point of making them very unhappy. I spend a lot of time in schools, and I'll give you 2 examples of things I've seen happen that are designed to protect kids but actually make them unhappy. One is that in a lot of middle schools in Chatham County, it's a very popular practice to try to prevent fights in the halls and kids being late to class in middle schools. So these are 13, 14-year-old kids, and if you think about what you are capable of at that age by yourself, you'll understand what I'm saying in a second. 13, 14-year-old kids are not allowed to walk from math class to English class without being in a single file line chaperoned by an adult. This is a very common practice, and it's put in place for completely reasonable reasons by completely intelligent and reasonable people who are trying to stop fights in the hallways and stop kids being late to class. But while they've solved those problems, what they've created is another problem where kids are being treated like they are incompetent. And because they're being treated like they're incompetent, they're starting to feel incompetent. They're starting to feel like, since we can't trust them to walk from one door to the next, they can't be trusted to do anything, and it must be because there's something wrong with them. So that is how one way we're trying to protect kids is actually hurting them and putting them in a situation where 10 years from now, when they're trying to go to a job interview, they might have a panic attack because they've never had to go somewhere on their own. And they've also never had the chance to be late to class and realize that it's not the end of the world when you're late to something. Yeah. Try not to, but it happens. Another example of a way in which we're trying to protect kids too much and hurt them as a result is in the fact that it's very popular now to spend a lot of time telling kids how talented and how perfect and how brilliant they are, right? Even when the work that they produced is sometimes mediocre, because that's normal, especially when you're learning. And we think that by telling them that they're talented and perfect and wonderful, we're going to make them feel so good about themselves. But what it actually does is teaches them to be incredibly fragile to criticism. And it teaches their sense of self-worth to be based on what other people say about them and not what they achieve for themselves. And so when we think telling a kid that they're brilliant is going to make them feel brilliant, what it actually does is create situations where I'm in a class trying to help a kid revise a story that's not good yet, and I tell them that I think that they should rewrite a sentence, and they burst into tears. And I tell you that because that happens to me at least 15 times a year. It happens to me all the time. So the solution to this problem, these kids are feeling unhappy because we're treating them like they're fragile, and they're not. A 13-year-old kid, a 12-year-old kid is incredibly capable. They're an incredibly capable person. And so the solution is really simple and actually makes our lives easier, which is to give our kids more challenging things to do and to let them mess up sometimes when they try to do them, and for us to stop trying to fix problems for them, to let them fix their own problems because they can. In my nonprofit, we give kids a very challenging task. We ask them to write a story that will be engaging to readers, that's worthy of publication. We expect them to make mistakes along the way. We work on revision with them. We work on peer revision and feedback. And because of that, when they get to the final step and they get published, the pride they feel and the happiness that they feel is real because they know they've achieved something that wasn't easy and it wasn't handed to them. So I think the solution is really easy. We just have to let off, and once we do that, our kids are going to be so happy. Thank you.